Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is another annual WILMIC Summer Seminar as summer winds down here this year. We appreciate you being here. We appreciate all of you watching on the web. I think we have a terrific program this morning. It'll be done in 3 separate sessions, each running about 50 minutes or so. Before I introduce our first speaker, let me mention that the second hour will be Steve Hurley, and the third hour will be a panel discussion with Gregg Herman, Steve Hurley, and Megan Phillips, and I will moderate that. We invite questions, comments anytime. For those of you on the web, you will notice under your video screen, you will see a box that has 2 links. One is the program material, and the other is a link that should say submit a question. So that's pretty self-explanatory. Just click on that. Your email should come up, and fire off your question or comment, and we will receive it and we'll talk about it. So that's about it. The restrooms, for those of you that are here, right outside the conference room, and we'll get started. So again, appreciate you coming. Our first speaker is Gregg Herman. Gregg is a Milwaukee lawyer who is a shareholder in the law firm of Loeb and Herman. Gregg has been practicing since 1977. Not to age you or anything, Gregg. It's your wisdom and experience that brings you here. Gregg is currently on the State Bar Board of Governors. He is also with the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers and the Wisconsin chapter of the AFCC. Author of the publication Settlement Negotiation Techniques in Family Law, a Guide to Improved Tactics and Resolution. That's published by the ABA Family Law Section. Gregg was also chair of the ABA Family Law Section from August 2007 to August of 2008. He's also the founder of the Cooperative Divorce Institute and served as its first chair from 2003 to 2005. Gregg brings a wealth of experience. I've known Gregg for many, many years, and I'm very happy that he's here to participate in our program with us. So please give a warm welcome to Gregg Herman.
Thanks, Tom. When Tom called me, I was initially very, very pleased that he asked me to speak, and I appreciate the warm introduction. And then I started thinking about it for a minute. Tom asked me to speak on the topic of making mistakes. And I'm just wondering, what happened? Did Tom and Sally and Katya, have like a committee meeting and said, hey, who's made more mistakes out there, okay? Who would have more experience in how to really, really screw things up? They said, we got to get Herman. He's the one guy. Well, in all those years of practicing law, 38, God, it seems to be a long time, doesn't it? I remember the years thinking anybody who was practicing more than 20 years was an old geezer and ready for the to be farmed out. It isn't just the concept of making mistakes that I want to talk about, because we all do that. That's common. And I am going to talk in the first part of this in terms of the issue of making mistakes and what type of mistakes we do make. But the second part of this is the part that I really want to focus on more, which is how to recover from mistakes. Because we all make them, we're all human, and it's the recovery that I think is more critical in terms of what we can learn from these things. You know, my first thought in terms of the first part of this, how not to make mistakes, comes from the Steve Martin routine about how to become a millionaire. Step 1, get $1 million. And it's sort of the same thing, how not to make mistakes. Well, just don't make them. Well, yeah, that's really nice to say, but in real life, we all do that. And in my outline, I go to the second part, which is, well, if you don't want to make mistakes, then don't go to law school. Oops, too late for that. It's not that there aren't other areas that that have pressures, that have areas where they can make mistakes. But I want to focus on the not just going to law school, but also the next item, which is if you are going to go to law school, don't practice law. A lot of people that do get law degrees don't practice, but I would assume that most of us in the audience here are in the practice of law, right? Okay. And it's in the nature of the practice of law, I think, that we make mistakes and certain types of mistakes because we deal with services. And I think when we start talking about the errors and the types of errors that we can make, how to prevent them and how to recover from them, You have to start with what is within the nature of what our practice is that lends towards making mistakes. We have very, very little science in terms of what we do. It is mostly art form, and it's mostly human nature. And in that type of scenario, you're going to do things wrong. Theoretically, in science, if you perform the same experiment under the same circumstances in a different place, you should have the identical results. If you don't have the identical results, you did something wrong. We deal with human nature. All law is semantics. It's use of language. And language can be interpreted by different people in different ways, and it doesn't make one person right and one person wrong. And nobody has yet developed an ability to draft human language that isn't subject to different interpretations. In addition, we're dealing with clients who are human beings who, like us, are flawed and therefore are going to interpret what we're saying in different ways. As Tom said in his introduction, I'm a divorce lawyer, and so I deal with people that are in a high degree of stress. And when I meet with people at especially initial consultations, their ability to be able to assess and understand the language that I'm using is severely compromised by the stress they're going through. Meeting and talking to somebody on an even nature. When I came in and I said hello to Tom and I said hello to Sally, said hello to Katya, and catch up a little bit on some of the stuff that goes on here. We're professionals. We're here to do the program today. It's easy. Somebody comes to see me whose life is falling apart and they believe is at the end of their life, sometimes to the extent of being suicidal, sometimes financially suicidal in some of the decisions they're going to make, and sometimes suicidal financially, means that their ability to assess what I'm telling them is compromised, and their memory of what I'm going to tell them is also compromised. So it's not just what I say that may go wrong, but how they understand what I say. And I assume, although I've only practiced in two areas, I was a prosecutor for 7 years, and then I've been a divorce lawyer for about 31 years. God. But I would assume in other areas, although stress and divorce is probably higher than most other areas, that the similarities the same, if not just because of the area of law, but because people are nervous meeting with lawyers. People's perception of us a lot of times is driven by movie and TVs. They think that especially, I introduce people, I'm a divorce lawyer. And I try to have a sense of humor. I try to keep things light, just somewhat as a defense mechanism. Sometimes I just like to laugh. And people are just amazed. A divorce lawyer with a sense of humor? I mean, it's just sort of contrary to expectations. I'm supposed to eat nails for a living. And I'm supposed, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I'm supposed to chew people up. I'm supposed to kill people. I'm supposed to destroy families. And I'm supposed to run a meter that's way out of proportion. Not that that isn't true of any divorce lawyer out there. There are enough to be able to establish the stereotype. But part of the problem that clients aren't totally following what we're doing is when they meet with us and we're talking about concepts of compromise, settlement, resolution. The good lawyers in my field, and I suspect in all fields today in the practice of law, is one of resolution. And this has been a huge change. I've been asked, in the 38 years I've been doing this, I keep blanching every time I think of that number. I don't know. I still think of myself as 31 years old, okay? But the biggest change is when I went to law school, they did not teach anything in ADR. They never talked about mediation. They never talked about how to settle cases. They never talked about any of the concepts that go into it today in family law and collaborative divorce, cooperative divorce, all the different developments that have been out there. And today, what lawyers are, and this has been a huge transition, is problem solvers. We're trying to solve people's problems, not just to advocate for them. Sometimes we do, but that's easier because we go to court and we argue, the judge makes a decision, and if something goes wrong, it's possible to say, well, the court did this. When we're trying to resolve things, we are trying to get people to give things up that they don't want to give up. And Steve's going to talk on the second part of this program in terms of the concept of meeting with a client, choosing clients, having the right client choose you. And if this was as simple as the Steve Martin joke, this would all be very easy if we all had the right type of clients. The clients who understood the concepts I'm talking about and then understood that not everything is going to go perfectly because we're dealing with human nature and we're dealing with human response. Well, this would be easy. Unfortunately, it'd probably put WILMIC out of business. Sorry, guys, you have to get a new job, Sally, but you could do that, right? You know, it always find some work, no matter what. But that isn't what's out there. And the people who are hiring us tend to be people whose lives, in one sense or another, are compromised either by what they're going through or because of what they did to cause what they're going through. So we can't choose just every single perfect client. If we could, life would be a whole lot easier. And we have these instances where people are then judging us to a large extent, not just on whether our advice was well intended, not just on whether our advice was considering their circumstances and doing the best we can, but how did it turn out over time? And there are a couple of problems with that scenario. One of which is, and I'm going to get a little bit off my field of expertise here, and I'm going to talk about everything that I remember from taking physics I think I was a sophomore here at Madison. Please don't ask me any questions about physics because I'm totally exhausted, everything I remember from 40 years ago, okay? But there's a principle that says that you can't measure, and I don't know if neutrons or atoms or whatever it is, somebody, you can correct me if you know what it is, because the act of trying to measure it changes the location. In other words, you can't predict where something is because trying to find it changes where it is. I think it's called the uncertainty principle, and I don't know anything more about it when I just described, but our acts in representing clients, in trying to recommend what they do, changes what that future is. Because if we tell them do A, B, C, and D, it's a different outcome than if we told them E, F, G, and H, okay? And therefore, in trying to formulate a recommendation, we change the potential outcome. And you can never go back to be able to see, well, if we had done the other, what would be the result? Maybe it would be the same, maybe it would be different. In my field, in divorce law, my friend Mr. Paleman would well know, we recommend a woman give up maintenance in exchange for a cash payment, a very common thing that we do. It means that the husband, or can be, in today's world is often the wife, the person who makes the money, can go out and make as much money as they want and not be afraid of having to share it later. It gives them a free leash to do what they want in life. If we made the opposite choice and say, no, we're not going to do a buyout, and make a recommendation that future income is subject to support, then there may be different choices as to how much income the payor is going to earn. The second problem that is coexistent with this comes from, I think of a quote by the greatest American philosopher, in my opinion, of all time. You know who that is, right? The greatest American philosopher is, I'm sorry? Mark Twain. You're better than Mark Twain. Good guess, though. Yogi Berra. But you got the right idea, somebody. Aristotle. Yeah, right, like I ever read Aristotle. Yogi Berra, who is the greatest American philosopher, in my opinion, who among other lines that he may or may not have said, was the predictions are very difficult to make, especially about the future. And it's true, we're all great at predicting the past. You know, I was amused on Monday evening to watch some of the news reports about all these stockbrokers who are recommending to clients what they should do now regarding their stock holdings. And I want to know how many of them last Thursday said, sell now, okay? It's really easy after the market lost 1,000 points to say, well, here's what you ought to do now, that, or what you should have done 2 days ago, rather. But I want to know how many stockbrokers on Wednesday or Thursday of last week told people to sell as opposed to what they're saying now. And that's the position we're in as well. Part of the, I don't want to use the term trick in this, part of the strategy in this obviously is in terms of selecting good clients, but a great deal of this in terms of our control is to understand that we can not predict the future in any meaningful way, and that the recommendations that we make in terms of how this will play out in many instances affects how it does end up playing out. So therefore, the concept in terms of avoiding mistakes begins with understanding that these limitations exist, and therefore any advice we're going to give is subject to it not playing out as we wish it would at some time in the future. So the concept is not how to avoid mistakes, because we can't do that. We're all going to make mistakes. Some of our advice, and I'll talk a bit later about different types of mistakes, but if we try simply to say, I'm not going to make mistakes, it isn't going to happen. It is minimizing the mistakes that we make. And there are 3 areas that I want to talk about in terms of helping to do that. And I know to a large extent when I deal with people that are signing up for these seminars for WILMIC, it's preaching to the choir, so forgive me for this. But one is defining an area of practice. I'm amazed at people that do and are capable of doing general practice. I'm in just one very limited area of law, and it's a full-time job to keep up with all the changes in family law, keep up with the cases that come down, and information overload, I'm sure, is true in every other area of law as well. And it's important to find that area of practice that you can do and avoid practicing in areas where you don't. That's why there are referrals. That's why the Wisconsin Bar Association, Milwaukee Bar Association have lawyer referral services. That's why hopefully we all have friends who can help us out in terms of advice or referrals if we need to. Second is degree of difficulty within the practice. So you have an area of law, there's an area you do. There may be certain types of cases that are not within your particular bailiwick, that just is a little bit outside of that. You can be a very, very good basketball player, but it doesn't make you Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan could take off from the free throw line, do a 360 in the air, and dunk the ball seamlessly, and he makes it look easy. Well, I like to shoot baskets. Trust, I can't even get off the ground anymore, much less, and I never could do that either. But if your forte is the free throw, your forte is the layup, whatever it is, not to kill the analogy, play within your means, because you can be the best lawyer you can within the framework of what you practice and in the area you practice, and be careful not to get outside of that, because that's where troubles are caused. And third, the style of practice, even if it's within your area of practice and within your level of expertise within that area of practice, there are clients who want certain strategies employed, cases handled in certain ways that you just may not be comfortable with. It depends on your personality. I am terrible at bluffing. If you ever want to invite me to a poker game, I'm great, okay? Everybody can tell, because if I ever get a good hand, my voice goes up, I get scratchy, I start to, they call it a tell. I'm telling all over the place in terms of when I have a good hand, and when I have a bad hand, I'm looking at it, it's just like that. And I feel the same way in terms of handling divorce cases. I know lawyers that are capable of going to court the day of trial completely unprepared and bluffing their way through a settlement. I can't do that. I just can't. If you're good at it, God bless. Great, there's an extra ability that you have. But if your style of practice is that you need to be prepared, or you need to be more prepared than somebody else does, understand that area. There are certain clients in my area of practice that are looking for rape/kill mutilate. They want a vicious approach. And I know how to do that. I'm just not really good at it. Shut up, Paleman. The I think, I have at home a lovely young female black Labrador retriever. She's just absolutely adorable and gorgeous and sweet. And she's got these big brown eyes that look up at you. And sometimes just for fun, I'll curl back her lips and say, okay, let's see how mean you can get. And she looks at me with these big brown eyes. Why are you doing that? You see a pit bull, those eyes are angry. When they're snarling, they're mean, okay? My dog doesn't have a mean bone in her big fat body, okay? It's all sweetness and love, and she just wants to be petted. So you can snarl those lips. She can do the actions, but it doesn't go through to where those eyes are. She just wants to be petted and loved. So if you're the type of lawyer that wants to be petted and loved, and that's great, because that helps lead to resolution in a lot of cases if you're playing within your type. You can be the best lawyer that is within your ability. If you're not to take off from the free throw line, do a 360 in the air and stuff the ball, don't try to be. But if you're the best lawyer at trying to resolve cases, at being reasonable, understand who you are and your personality. And then, when you meet with the clients, explain it to them. And yeah, you're not going to get the case from the mean, rotten person, the person that wants the mean pit bull, but you don't want that client because it's not going to work out eventually either. We do make compromises all the time in this because life isn't that perfect and because we all have rent and payroll to make. And sometimes it's a whole lot easier said than done. It's also a whole lot easier said than done if you have the right facts and the right case in front of you. And if you don't, there may not be a whole lot you can do. And that gets to the point of trying to take the objective point of view of any individual case. I heard a wonderful story about John Roberts when he was nominated to be Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. And the story was that he represented a client in front of the Supreme Court, and he gets an adverse decision 9-0 against him. He calls his client, he says, I have really, really bad news. We lost 9-0. And his client said, how could we lose 9-0? And Roberts said, because there are only 9 justices on the Supreme Court. So if there had been 11, we would have lost 11-0, okay? Sometimes we're just wrong. Sometimes we just don't have the facts. Sometimes we just don't have the right case. And those are the cases, obviously, that you need to try to resolve. And it's also the ones where it's not just being honest with the client about it, but it's being honest with ourselves. We all have the problem that we begin to like not just ourselves, but we like our cases. We get into the cases, we try to develop cases, we try to develop a strategy, and pretty soon we fall in love with it. And when we do fall in love with the case, that's where mistakes happen, because we lose the objectivity. And we go to court, we get our, what handed to us, and we get angry at the court for not understanding it. It's the advantage. I have a young associate who always tells me that I can say things today at my age that she can't say at her age. And I say, well, there's got to be some advantage for getting older. There's got to be something, and maybe that's it, that you can have the advantage of, that you can get away with more things, say things, and people will just excuse it for whatever reason. There's a wonderful movie called Being There with Peter Sellers. I never see it run. Anyone seen that? Say one guy, a couple people, okay? And it's just, the theory is he plays a gardener called Chauncey Gardner. And everybody thinks he's brilliant because they see him, I believe it's at the White House, and they think he's a counselor to the president, and all he's saying is simple aphorisms, but because of where he is, people think he's much wiser than in fact he is. It's a wonderful movie, and it's a wonderful point. people are going to think that because we're lawyers that we're smart. I don't know what percentage, a lot of percentage, what I tell people is simple common sense. I had a client a number of years ago who gave me a present. She gave me a book, and she said, "This is the book you seem to be quoting from a lot." The book is entitled, "Everything I Ever Wanted to Know I Learned in Kindergarten." Okay? Play nicely out there. Keep your hands to yourself. If you have nothing nice to say, don't say it. You know, it isn't that complicated. It really isn't. And a lot of what we do that is not anything more than what advice is in that book. But it's how we say it, how we present it, how we're comfortable with it, and getting the clients to understand us, to listen to us, and to understand that, hey, we're not guaranteeing anything. We don't guarantee any results. I tell clients the only thing I guarantee for you is that I'll do the best for you that I'm capable of doing. That's where the guarantees stop. Everything else is all subjective because we're all human beings. Lastly, in terms of the topic of trying to avoid mistakes, is the very, very generic one of don't think that you're perfect. Don't think that you can avoid making mistakes. Don't let the clients who sometimes try to convince you that you're the lifesaver convince you that you really are. Accept it, understand it, and then the next thing I want to talk about is, okay, we're human, we're going to make mistakes, what do we do, and how do we recover from it? And the first rule about recovering from mistakes, and this applies to all different types of mistakes, is the cover-up is almost always worse than the crime. The two examples in history is if Richard Nixon had said in 1972, boy, was that stupid sending those guys into those offices in the Watergate complex. That was really dumb. I'm going to win this election anyway with, 49 states that he ended up winning by? I didn't need to do that. It was dumb. I'm sorry. I'm going to fire everyone involved in it. He would have gone down in history as the president who opened up China as opposed to the president who resigned. If Bill Clinton, instead of saying, I can't do my Bill Clinton imitation, I didn't have sex with that girl, had said instead, yeah, you know what, I did, it was awful, it was wrong, but this is a matter between me and Hillary, and I apologize, he would not have gone down in history as the second president ever to get impeached. Something goes wrong, and it can be any of the different types of mistakes I'm going to be talking about in a minute, but whatever the type it is trying to cover it up is worse than the mistake itself. And by the way, it's liberating not to cover it up. There's an old saying that and it may be Mark Twain, in fact, that the problem with being a liar is you need a really good memory. I think it is Mark Twain, isn't it? Yeah. It's trying to cover it up means you have to remember all the steps covering it up. And I'm just not that smart, okay? It's just so much simpler and easier just to tell the truth about it at the beginning, and it's liberating. Okay, I made a mistake. I'm going to say I made a mistake. I'm human, so sue me. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. Don't sue us, okay? Don't say that. Minimizing as well, and this depends on the type of excuse that we're dealing with, but minimizing or making excuses of why you did it, in most circumstances, there may be exceptions to this, is wrong, as it ends up detracting from the admission in and of itself. I have a side job, essentially. I said I'm a divorce lawyer. About 5% of my practice is I serve as retained counsel for OLR. Been doing it for ever since I left the DA's office. I get hired on a case-by-case basis, and it's sort of fun. Lets me use my prosecutorial experience, and gets me to litigate, gets me to scratch that itch. Number of years ago, I'm assigned to a case where the lawyer was revoked for stealing money, criminally prosecuted, and he's maybe like 10 years later, and he's applying for reinstatement. So OLR hires me to represent them in the reinstatement hearing. The lawyer takes the witness stand, and he says, what I did 10 years ago was awful. It was terrible. I could tell you why I did it, what excuses I made for it, but I don't want to do that. I just want to apologize. I want to tell you I paid the money back. I wrote a letter of apology to the victims. I have gone out and I have volunteered for every church, synagogue, mosque, Buddhist temple I could find. You had letters like that from all these places. I've done charity work for everyone I can, and I'm making no excuses. What I did was wrong. I want you to concentrate on what I have become and what I am now. The referee said, thank you, Mr. Herman, cross-examination. I go, you sure you're sorry? I mean, what? I have nothing to, how do you cross-examine that? How do you say, what do you say at that point? And I actually believe that I did say, I have no questions of this witness. And it may be the only case I've litigated in my career that I've ever said that to the opposing party. I had no questions because in looking through the file, at the time of the revocation, he had an alcohol issue, he had some drug issues, he pled some mental illness issues, he had every excuse in the world, he obviously lost and was revoked. And I don't know if it was him doing it or his counsel that told him to do it, but it was the perfect response in terms of the reinstatement proceeding, which was, I could make excuses, but I'm not going to. What I did was wrong, period. Let's concentrate on where we go from here. And he ended up being reinstated, and I think rightly so under the circumstances. The excuses are fine if they lead to corrective action. We'll talk a bit about more of that in a second. But other than that, if it's just whatever, clients don't want to hear it. We're professionals. And as professionals, we're not allowed to have, quote, bad days. Okay? Aaron Rodgers takes the field out at Lambeau, and he's supposed to complete passes. I don't care if he had a fight with his, I think he's still dating that model, isn't he? I don't know how you can have a fight with her. She's anyway. I don't care if he had a fight with his girlfriend. We don't care. We want him to complete passes. When you're a professional, be it a football player, baseball player, anything, or professional as a lawyer, our job is to block out everything else that is going on in our life and concentrate on what it is our role to do, which is to properly advise the client. So, yeah, you may have not gotten a good night's sleep. You may have fought with your significant other. You may have had whatever other problem. You're a professional. You block it out. You put it beside you. And you don't tell your client, hey, here's the excuse. No. You don't cover it up. You don't make an excuse. And lastly, and Tom asked me to spend about 2 hours on this one, right? I could spend the rest of the morning on don't charge clients for it, right? Yeah, go for it. God's sakes, do not, if there's a mistake, put on your client's bill 2.3 hours correcting mistake I made, okay? They don't want to see that. Clients want to hear three things. They want to hear, I made a mistake. Here's what I'm going to do to correct it, and you're not going to be charged for the correction. And let me just take this a step further so that people from WILMIC will be happy with me on this. I do some work as an expert witness in legal malpractice cases. And I've been hired by both sides. It's not a huge part of my practice. I think I only have 1 or 2 cases right now, but usually I have 1 or 2 at a time. I'll be either plaintiff's or defense witness. And they're a whole lot of fun because when I get deposed, I get sworn and I get 2 hours to say everything I think about a subject. Hey, don't just ask me one question. What do you think, Greg? When the court reporter runs out of paper, I'll let you know. In any event, I don't want to exaggerate and say that this is true in every single case I've seen, but it's hard for me to think of an exception. So in almost every case that I've been involved in as either plaintiff or defense expert, legal fees were, if not the cause of the problem, at least part of the problem. Cause of the problem are those, and I've seen any number of these, where the lawyer sues for fees and the client countersues for malpractice. And that is a common reaction. And again, I'm dealing in a field that's highly subjective. It's real easy to criticize another lawyer for a strategic recommendation made by that lawyer. That's why, while I do plaintiff side, think more often than not, I'll tell the plaintiff's lawyer who hires me, usually as a consultant, that if the recommendation was strategically within bounds, it's fine. It's not malpractice. I have seen some, and I have testified as a plaintiff's expert, where it clearly isn't. But and again, I don't want to exaggerate, I think in almost every case I've been hired as a plaintiff's or defense expert, it was either a countersuit for suing for fees, or the lawyer, something went wrong. And it didn't have to be the lawyer made a mistake. It just, the future didn't pan out like it was supposed to in that person's opinion, and the lawyer kept billing and charging. And at the end of the case, the lawyer wouldn't walk away from fees. So in that part, in terms of recovering from mistakes, and the mistake there may simply be to choose the wrong client, walk away from the damn fees. Did I say it strongly enough, Tom? Is that okay? Good, okay. And the number of times I've seen cases where the lawyer spent far more on the deductible and future premium for malpractice insurance than whatever the fees they were going to collect is quite a few cases. So it just isn't worth it. Our ego gets involved in it because we know we deserve to get paid. We know we did everything right. It's just a practical decision that it just isn't worth it. I've divided types of mistakes into several different categories, some of which I've already talked about, but in an attempt just to sort of discuss different ways in terms of recovery. The first I'm going to talk about are things like typographical errors. And for those of you who don't get the joke, I do know how to spell typographical. The fact that it's two F's, that's a joke, okay? Don't come up to me afterwards and say you made a mistake in it, okay? Part of the humor here. It's all part of the same cost for the seminar. And occasionally you do get clients who say, boy, you made mistakes on this and this. I'm like the world's worst proofreader. I mean, spell check is like a godsend to me. It was like whoever invented it must have known. Was it Mark Twain again that said, only a small mind thinks there's only one way of spelling a word? I think it was. Those are the easiest type to correct, where there is a what I'm going to call a typographical error or something that's misstated. I saw a letter once, I don't remember if it was mine or something else, but that left out the word not. That's a really bad word to leave out, out of things. Those are easy to correct, and those are easy fall on the sword. Oops, I made a mistake. Let me resend that and take care of that. The technical errors are the more difficult ones, and the most common technical error that I see today, and we've all seen these, is hitting reply all on the email, right? We've all seen that. I have fun as counsel for OLR because once I'm, as much as you have fun with that, once I'm hired as counsel, OLR is my client. So if I send an email to the respondent's lawyer, I'll copy OLR on it, and if they do reply all, they have communicated directly with my client, which is a violation of ethical rules. So I always, depending who the lawyer is, I don't always do this, but sometimes I'll call the other lawyer and say, you do realize you not only violated an ethical rule, but the, quote, victim is OLR, who may not be the group you want to violate an ethical rule with. I don't always do that because I don't want to get a panic response. And usually I get this, oh my God, what do I do? And I say, just don't do reply all. Don't worry about it. It's fine. They'll live with it. Nobody's going to die here, okay? But the point is that's a really common one. Or send an email to the wrong person. This morning, I get a text message from a client of mine that said something about dear son or something like that, and goes on and gives some nice advice. And by the time I pulled in the parking lot, there's a follow-up, oops, Greg, I was sending that to my son. I texted him back and said, I know you're not my father, don't worry about it. But those types are easy and should be quickly corrected. The opposing counsel one, I don't want to go into real detail because it's a little beyond the scope of this thing, but it's interesting when the mistake by the other attorney is simply a technical one, then you just laugh it off, be forgiving. A typical one in my field is hitting reply all on a message that was supposed to just go to the client, not be copied to me, and do the right thing. First, I don't care what they say anyway, but in most cases, but don't read it. Call the other lawyer, assure him or her that you haven't done that. Technical mistakes that they make, and a very common one in my field is arithmetic mistakes, running a computer program and making an error in terms of what they entered, what they didn't enter. If it's my mistake, and it has been, I would want the lawyer pointing it out to me, and I'll certainly point it out to the other attorney. I remember having a case once and driving home after a settlement and suddenly realizing that the other lawyer made a serious mistake on a tax issue, and it hadn't occurred to me. And I called him. I called him from my car, and I said, do you realize this? And he goes, oh my God, what do we do? I said, we do an amendment, and we clean it up. I'm not here to make money for the IRS. I didn't even call my client, because I don't care. In that case, I don't need my client's consent to be a professional, to be honest and ethical. Clients are not authorizing me to practice any other way. A week later, he calls me and he says, Gregg, there's another mistake. He didn't say you made. He said, there's another mistake, but it was my mistake. So I said, oh my God, you're right. He said, what do we do? He says, you drafting the amendment? Yeah. Add a second paragraph. 2 paragraphs, amended, everybody's happy, and nobody, I don't know what he did. I certainly didn't bill my client for it, and we always correct it. There is another area out there when the lawyer's the type of lawyer who would not point out your mistake or help you correct it, and I'll leave you to your own devices on that one. Lastly, mistakes by the court, and where the mistake by the court is one that, again, is technical. The court made an addition mistake, added things up wrong. We're professionals, we're officers of the court, and we need to tell courts that, not just file an appeal on it. In terms of ethical violations, I'm not, this isn't the type of group that needs the full lecture on it, and I'm just going to add a couple of things that I've learned from being OLR counsel over the years. One of them is, if you haven't read SCR 20 since law school, take it home and once every 2 or 3 years or whatever and reread it, because as OLR counsel, it has happened to me more than once where they've sent a case to me to be issued. I've looked at it and gone, really, that's a violation? Oh my God, didn't know that, didn't realize it. So every once in a while, just read through the code. It'll take an hour or less, and it really is helpful. Don't compound it by playing ostrich. In the cases I handle for OLR, many times the mistake is exacerbated because the lawyer pretended it didn't happen. I don't need to go through this with this group, but you get that letter from OLR and they want a response. There's a saying I heard once about divorce lawyers. It goes, if you're a family law attorney, you never say there are no grievances pending against you. You say, I am currently between grievances. They're just angry people, and they like to file grievances. Sometimes you're going to get them. Don't bury your head in the sand. You get that letter saying you have to respond, then make sure that you do. And lastly, one of the greatest mistakes I've found with people that are in the unfortunate position of being on the other side of an OLR case with me is that they don't go talk to somebody else. And if it's serious, you ought to hire someone. It's worth the consultation. In my field, the best value my clients get for their money is to meet with me in an initial consultation. I do charge for it, but I do it on a flat fee basis. I'll spend whatever time it takes. I'll answer a question on the phone later. It's the best value for money is that initial meeting. If for no other reason to find out you don't have a problem, it'll be the best money you never spent. If you don't want to do that, find a friend of yours who'll be objective, who's willing to tell you what you should hear, not necessarily what you want to hear. In terms of malpractice, which is different than ethical violations, although there may be an overlap in many cases, WILMIC did not ask me to say this, but if you practice without insurance, you might as well be like that Walenda guy that walked across the racetrack in Milwaukee a couple weeks ago without a net. Go ahead, have fun, good luck. Don't do it. If you can afford it, if it's a mistake that is easily affordable, and I've seen these in a number of cases where they've just blown up out of control, but it's a few $1,000s. Adjust the fees, whatever you have to do, pay it up and walk away. Not only do you have a deductible in your malpractice insurance, but it's a whole lot easier to get a smaller premium in the future and coverage if you can check that box saying no claims against me. So if you can afford it, whatever it is. It reminds me of the days when I had 3 teenage drivers, and there wasn't a mailbox in our neighborhood that they didn't hit. I'm surprised anybody ever got mail. Okay, light pole, and I'm not so sure there was a car. And I'd call my insurance agent, say, I got another one. And she would say, Greg, can you afford to fix it yourself and pay for the other car? Yeah. She said, we didn't have this conversation. Click. Okay? If you can buy it off yourself, buy it off yourself. And again, lastly, the same thing as with the malpractice, which is if you have a question about it, you're not sure, find somebody who practices in the area. Call Tom, call Sally, call Katya, call somebody who's experienced in the field who can give you some good advice. And I want to end with something that hopefully a little more positive, because my area of law tends to be a lot of negative, a lot of bad stuff. And trying to find silver linings is difficult, but I really try to. So I thought, is there any silver lining in terms of making mistakes in recovery? And I found one, which is, unless it's really, really awful and somebody got really, really badly hurt, which is not true in most mistakes, they make great stories later. So let me share with you my favorite story, one of my favorite stories about a mistake that I made. It actually happened when I was in law school, and at the time, it was mortifying. But here's the story. I finished my first year of law school, and I was very, very flattered to be invited to join law review. That was cool. I'm on law review. I'm hot, you know what, okay? I'm going to get whatever job. I'll be just great. And I immediately take my resume and type up a new one. And for those of you wondering, yes, you sat down at a typewriter and typed it up. That becomes important in the story, okay? And no, I didn't hitch my horse to the hitching post or whatever. It's not that old, but you did have to sit down and type it up. So I type it up. I add law review to it. I'm thrilled. I mail it out to every place I could think of. I get a request for an interview with a really top firm. This is wonderful. I'm walking in trying to decide which office I want and which desk, and I go into one of the senior partner's offices, and he's got his resume in front of him, and he says, I see I did this, Greg, you did this, that's really good. He says, made law review, huh? Yep, I sure did. He says, how do you spell review? R-E-V-I-E-W. And he hands me my resume. On every single one that went out, I don't know how many I sent out, R-E-V-E-I-W. This is before spell check, okay, guys? I'm totally mortified, but it does make a great story later. I did not get that job, but it does serve to show you that if you do make enough mistakes out there, you'll have great stories, and maybe Tom can invite you to speak at a future seminar. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Greg. We'll take a 10-minute break. We will be back right up at 10 o'clock. For those of you on the web, hang with us. We will be right back. Thank you. All right, we're back. If everyone could take their seats, we'll get started with hour number 2. For those of you on the web, welcome back. And again, if you want to submit a question, you can do so on the link on the bottom of your screen. I do want to mention a couple of housekeeping items. You probably all know by now, but this 3-hour program has been approved for 3 ethics credits. So in case you were wondering about that, every once in a while we get people asking about that. Also, during that first hour, you might have heard that pinging, and I apologize for that. That was coming from my iPad. We had a couple of web viewers checking in, trying to make sure they were getting the feed, and I wasn't paying attention, and that thing was going off. But it is muted, so that won't be a problem any longer. Our next speaker will do many things for us, one of which will be to correct any of Gregg's mistakes during the first hour. And he's very good at that. No, actually, Steve Hurley is a shareholder in the law firm of Hurley, Burrish, and Stanton here in Madison. He concentrates his practice on business and criminal litigation. He earned his law degree from the University of Illinois College of Law in Champaign-Urbana. He is admitted to practice here in Wisconsin as well as in Illinois. Steve is a member of the UW Law School adjunct faculty. He has been doing that since 1989. Teaching trial advocacy and evidence. He's a frequent lecturer at legal education programs, and we are very delighted that he has come to participate in our program. In 2004, he received the Warren Stopler Award for the most outstanding adjunct member of the instructional staff at UW Law School. He's also a fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers, also listed in the Best Lawyers in America in the criminal law section since 1995. And he has been a member since 2005 of the Board of Directors of the Federal Defender Services of Wisconsin. And I first met Steve, I don't know if you remember, Steve, I first met Steve back when I was a reporter, and I was covering the Minnesota Gopher trial back in the mid-'80s, and that's when I actually got the bug to go to law school myself. I have watched Steve many times in the courtroom, and as I said, I'm very delighted he's here with us. So please welcome Steve Hurley.
Thanks, Tom. Interesting that you got a divorce lawyer and a criminal lawyer here today. Though, you know, the problem with the term criminal lawyer is you don't know which word is the modifier. When I was a young lawyer, I'd moved up here after being a public defender in Illinois, and I moved up here and I started my practice in Stoughton. And of course, being a young lawyer trying to build a practice, even though I knew I wanted to do litigation and particularly criminal law, I took anything that came in the door. And after about a year, I had a fairly substantial divorce practice. After about 2 years of that, my birthday present to myself was to give up that divorce practice. I couldn't afford it financially, but I couldn't afford it emotionally. My hat is off to Gregg, because when people come to see a divorce lawyer, it is astounding what they do to one another and then what they ask their lawyer to do to the other. I would take a murderer any day of the week. Now, this book of rules of professional responsibility really comes down to 2 categories. The first category is don't lie, cheat, or steal. And the second category is all the technical rules about conflicts of interest, trust accounts, fees, da-da-da. The first category, don't lie, cheat, or steal, if your mom didn't teach you by the time you were 10 years old, nobody in this room can help you. The second category, the bar can help you. We can teach you about what to do with trust accounts, fees, conflicts of interest. But you can not lie, cheat, or steal. You can follow all those rules wonderfully, and you can still get a complaint filed against you. And what we don't teach in these seminars very often is how to avoid having that complaint filed even though you did the right thing, even though you didn't make a mistake. And that's what I want to talk about today. I think it's especially important since '08 when the market crashed and it changed the finances of the practice of law. I graduated law school in 1972. And back then, about half my class was expected to go into practice on its own. And we did. We built our own practices. Then the law profession went into a bubble, and that bubble lasted about 35 years, when everybody who went to law school could expect that when they left law school, there would be a job waiting for them. And the practice of law became less competitive. Then the crash came. People got let go from their jobs. My students coming out of the UW Law School couldn't get jobs. Even students who did extraordinarily well in law school. And they began to have to develop their own practices. Large law firms had to re-examine the model that they were using for making money. And the practice of law got very competitive again and remains that way, and I expect it's going to remain that way for a very long time. And when all these lawyers are out there competing for clients, when lawyers are hungry for clients, that's when you have to watch yourself, because that's when you're going to make mistakes. And that's really what I want to address. What I tell you in the materials is that the first 5 rules in Chapter 20 are the basis for almost every complaint that's made against a lawyer. They deal with competence, the scope of representation, and the allocation of authority between the lawyer and the client. They deal with diligence, communication, and fees. And if you ask OLR, they're going to tell you that most of the complaints they get against lawyers are about these 5 rules. If you cover the parameters of these 5 rules in your initial conference with a client, you will not have this problem. Most lawyers will budget an hour in their day for an initial interview. And if that's what you do, it's probably way too brief. When I meet with a client for a first time, it takes me 2.5 hours. And I don't charge for that 2 or 2.5 hours. So it's a lot of valuable time from my perspective that I'm giving away. But that valuable time is time that I'm spending for my benefit. We don't like to think of ourselves in terms of that we speak, or terms that we use to speak about commodities or other things in the stream of commerce, but the fact is, when we meet with a client for a first time, we're making a sale. And we're competing with others in order to make that sale. And what you have to remember is you have to make good on what you're selling. If I'm not a lawyer, if I'm selling goods to the public, if I own a hardware store and I sell you bad stuff, you're never going to come back. And you may file a complaint. The same thing's going to happen to you as lawyers. So this is where the rules about don't lie, cheat, or steal really come into play. The basis for that first meeting that you have with a client has to be honesty. Your honesty with the client and the client's honesty with you. The latter isn't always easy. You have to go into the meeting understanding that what most clients want is a good lawyer at an affordable price who's going to put their mind to rest. Whether it's a criminal case, a divorce, whether it's a contract dispute, they want to leave that meeting with their mind at ease, knowing that someone is going to take care of it well, and knowing what the odds are that what they want to achieve can be achieved. That latter part isn't easy. It's very difficult to tell a client how something is going to turn out. So we get there by listening. And this is the hard part for a lawyer. It means that in that initial conference, at least for half of it, you got to keep your mouth shut. Now that's something that just is unbelievably, congenitally difficult for a lawyer to do. But you have to keep your mouth shut. It's really difficult when the client with the run-on mouth walks in, and we've all had them. The person who you pose a question to them, and they commence a soliloquy, right, that has nothing to do with the question, at least you think initially. And they'll talk for 10 minutes. And around the 9th minute, they actually get to the answer to the question that you asked. And it's hard to sit there and listen to that. It's hard to sit and listen to that for an hour. But here's why you should. All the time that the client is digressing, that the client is trying to take control of the situation, that the client is telling you things that are irrelevant, you're learning something about that client. You're learning about whether they can take direction. You're learning about whether they are capable of giving testimony, if it's a case that might require testimony. You're learning how they organize their thoughts. You're learning about what's important to them. If I ask, where were you that night, and they start telling me something that has nothing to do with that night and has everything to do with what they were doing the week before, they're telling me what's important to them. It may not be what I asked, but it's important to them, and they deserve to be listened to. Not because eventually they're going to be paying the bill, but because I need to do a good job. You're going to find out whether the client is someone who wants to be involved in the matter that they bring to you, or whether they just want to give it to you and not have further contact or have minimum contact with it. That's telling you something about how you're going to share authority, about what the scope of the representation is. You're learning about what they're going to allow you to do and what they want you to do, and you have the opportunity to correct them if you think that it's wrong. So just listening at that initial conference and letting them talk is probably going to give you more information about whether you're a good fit with this client or not than anything else you do. After they've spoken, then begin to ask them questions to clarify what they said. Now, you don't always get the ones that talk. Yesterday, I had a young fellow come into my office to see me about a matter. And I said, what happened? And he said, well, the police came. And I said, well, when did they come? Well, last Friday. And what happened? And it went on like that, where I got 2-word answers. And really had to pull it out of him. I learned a lot. I know that this guy is going to be a terrific witness. This guy is not yes, no, and I don't recall, which is what we all want every witness to do, right? This guy's going to be marvelous. I also learned how shy he was. I learned a lot from his body language. I left with a sense of who this person really was. And so I know, because I know a lot better who he is, I know what I have to tell the DA to try to get this settled. So listen. After you've listened, teach. You do this for a living, you've done it for a long time, and you assume that the clients know the lingo, and you assume that they know something about the process, and they really don't. They watch television, they go to movies, as Gregg was saying, so much of their perception of us and their expectations of us is colored by television and movies that have no semblance with what we actually do in life. You know, we have to be aware of that. So they pick up a word here and there, and they pick up a notion here and there, and they don't ask you about it, they assume it's true. And you use those words, and you're really talking about two different things. In my line of work in the criminal law, everybody knows there are misdemeanors and felonies, and everybody knows that felonies are more serious than misdemeanors. But few people know what they really mean, why they're more serious than misdemeanors, what the potential for penalty is of each, what the collateral consequences of each are. And so I take a long time to explain this to them, because understanding not only the consequences of what someone is charged with, but the collateral consequences is really important to the decision making that we'll have to engage in later on in the process. And then I explain the process. Everything from the moment of arrest, if it's a criminal case, all the way through trial and sentencing. And this takes quite a while. It's about a 20-minute lecture that I can give in my sleep. When one of my partners is in the room with me, I can see the eyes roll back in their head as I go into the patter once again. But you'd be astounded at how many clients tell me afterwards, you know, I hired you because you explained things to me. And explaining this to them at the outset, at the initial interview, has everything to do with their developing expectations of me and my being able to affect that. Everything to do with what it is that I may be able to achieve for them. It alerts them to decisions that they'll have to make in the future. You know, do I take a felony that can be expunged to settle this case, or do I aim for a misdemeanor on my record that can't be expunged? These have very different consequences in the short run and the long run. And it's a difficult decision, and it's not one that should be made quickly. So explaining this at the outset, and explaining that this is a decision they make and that I never will. You know, I tell them there are certain decisions in this process that are yours to make. Do we settle this? What are the terms of settlement? Do we go to trial? Do you testify at trial? Those are your decisions. I will never make them. I'll give you recommendations if you want, but don't turn to me and say, you decide. I will not. Everything else, we vote on. And in case of a tie, I win. Okay? But now we've defined the boundaries right away. We know who is responsible for what. As with Gregg's clients, criminal clients walk in the most emotional state, right? You got the two lawyers today who get the most emotional clients ever. And they come in and they're scared, they're angry, and they always feel wronged. And so they want to get out of this situation, but they want something more. They want to be vindicated. And we have to take the time to ferret out those who feel that way and to get those feelings out of them so we can put them on the table and say, look, I can get you out of this criminal problem or I can get you divorced, but I am not going to get you justice. You're not going to be vindicated. The very best I can do for you at the end of the day is have you walk away. And if you want something more than that, you won't find it in me and you won't find it in anybody else. The time to do this is the first meeting, not after it's done and they come to you to complain. You do this at the very first meeting. You have a talk, and this has to do with the rules about diligence. You have a talk with a client at the first meeting about how long this is going to take. People watch television and they get divorced in 10 minutes, right? Yeah. DNA results come back in 5 minutes. The exculpatory evidence is found by a young techie who just happens to work in the lawyer's office and was fooling around one night on the computer and saw it, and it changes everything and the person's exonerated. People think the law happens quickly, and it doesn't. And you're going to get a complaint when, even though you do a terrific job, you don't meet that expectation. As I say in the written materials, nobody expects a grocery store to sell just one food in order to be able to stay in business. And everybody knows that a lawyer has other clients, but your client wants to be the only one. They don't want to hear from you, gee, I was busy on someone else's case. Nonetheless, we are busy on other people's cases and can't spend 24/7 on one case until it's done and then just go on to the next. And the time to address this is the first meeting. And I'll tell my clients, look, here's how long the process takes. Now, in the criminal law, on the defense side, time is our friend. It always is our friend. So we tend to want to drag things out. Clients hate this because they go to bed every night wondering, am I going to jail? Is my kid going to jail? Right? And the longer that goes on, the more emotional they get, the more upset they get. So we have this discussion at the outset. Not only is this going to take time, I'm going to make it take as much time as I possibly can. And I know that when I do that, you're going to bed at night unable to sleep. And I know that. I get it. And if you want me to speed it up, you just tell me. And we'll get this done in a couple of weeks. You're not going to like the result, but we'll do that. So when you're feeling like that, you call me. But in the meantime, here's how long it's going to take. The divorce lawyer should be saying, you know, and Greg, you correct me if I'm wrong. Here's how long it's going to take. Now, if you want to fight over, you know, who gets a half-filled can of paint, as I had a client do, it's going to take a whole lot longer and cost you a whole lot more money. But you don't bring this up while they're fighting over the half-filled can of paint. You do it at the beginning, and that initial conference is the place. And you clearly state the risk. Let's say it is a criminal case, which most of you I know don't do, but it's a good way to illustrate this. Somebody comes in to me to see me and they're charged with delivery of a controlled substance. This is usually young people who bought a little sometimes more than a little extra marijuana, so that when their friends came over, they could all share. And I have to tell them, you know, this is a felony, and here is the potential penalty for that felony. And I've listened to them. I understand what their record is, that they have no prior record. Let's say they're a senior in college, they're doing very well in school, they're looking at grad school, never had a problem in their life. I can tell them, you are not going to jail. You know, and I've done this long enough that I know under certain circumstances, you're not going to jail. So I want to tell them that right away. But beyond that, how exactly this is going to come out, I can't tell them. So I have to tell them, you know, there's a risk that this is going to create a record that's going to be there forever. There's a risk that because of the nature of the offense involved, you're not going to be able to get any more student loans. There's a risk of being placed on probation that may affect what you're going to do for the next summer. Because of this if this goes on your record, it means you're not going to be able to go to Canada because they won't let you in with that kind of offense on your record, and many other countries won't either. These are all the risks. I can't guarantee an outcome in this case, exactly what Greg was telling. That's so important at the first meeting to make that clear. You have to say this. There's a tension between saying this and making the sale, right? Because we know that the person wants us to put them at ease. And I'm here telling them about all the potential things that can happen to them. So I'm not putting them at ease. I'm having them think about things they never even thought about before, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. But to try and make the sale without having done that will cause you unbelievable problems later on. Right? They hire you, you go into it, 2 months later you bring them into the office and you say, hey, look, you're not going to jail, but I think there's going to be a felony conviction. So let me tell you now what all the consequences of that felony conviction are going to be. And they're sitting there saying, well, you never told me this. Or worse, they sit there thinking you told them that it wouldn't happen. Even though you didn't, that was the expectation in their head because they didn't hear from you what the true risk really was. So tell them at the beginning. And then the cost of representation. You're sitting there trying to make a sale, and you're thinking about your competition. You're thinking they went to see someone else, or they might go see someone else unless I hit this just right. And you're tempted to charge less because you don't want to lose the client to somebody else. There isn't a successful retailer in the world that doesn't know what his competitors are charging. And for you to come up with a fee on a case-by-case basis without knowing what the market will hold is crazy. You're either going to be too high or you're going to be way too low. And in both cases, one of you, the lawyer or the client, is going to be greatly unsatisfied. You come in too high and the client subsequently finds out that most lawyers don't charge that. They're going to be upset with you and they're going to complain about the fee. And you come in too low, you are going to have a disincentive to work hard on the case, and the client's going to complain about your diligence, your lack of communication. because you had other things to do that paid you a whole lot more. So the price has to be right. It has to take into consideration your skill, your experience, your competence, but also where you are in the marketplace. You know, I'd like to charge a whole lot more, but I can't because I have a lot of very good competitors who charge less. Many times, after I've had this first interview, I have no idea what it's going to cost. I don't know if this is something that can be taken care of quickly or whether it's something that is going to go the whole course of litigation. Particularly true in civil litigation. So what do I do? Well, what I do is I tell the truth. I say, I don't know what this is going to cost. And I tell them exactly why I don't know. Now, if I've been truthful with them, and they go to a competitor and the competitor says, I'll do this for X number of dollars, that client is going to sit there and wonder, well, how come he can say this? You know, Mr. Hurley told me, here's why we don't know, and this guy's giving me a fixed fee, and the client's going to think, I'm either paying too much or too little. And the client's going to be right. Because for the other lawyer to have given a fixed fee was an exercise in blind guessing, and someone will be dissatisfied. I have never lost a potential client by telling them the truth about the fact that at this stage, I have no notion what the fees are. I can give them a range. I can say, look, if this goes quickly, here's what it's going to cost. If it doesn't, this is probably the range of fees you're looking at. And I tell them, you know, you can pay me a lot of money now and be dissatisfied if it gets done quickly. Or, for the time being, I'll keep track of my hours, I'll bill you by the hour, and by this point in the process, whether it's litigation or not, by this point, I will know what it's going to cost. In a criminal case or in a civil case, it may be, in a criminal case, it may be by the time I get the discovery materials from the state, I will know where this is going. A different point in a civil case. And at that point, I'll tell them, I will offer you a choice. We can continue by the hour, or I'll offer you a flat fee. Entirely up to you which you prefer to do. But I've been honest with them, and I think they appreciate that honesty. I don't discourage price comparison, ever. In fact, I encourage it almost all the time. People don't know what they should expect lawyers to charge. They don't know how to select a lawyer. So I tell them, the first thing you have to do is make sure that you have a good lawyer. And I said, that's relatively easy to do. First, call the lawyer who wrote your will or who did your closing on your house and ask him, I went to see this guy, is he any good? So you can do all kinds of research on the internet today. And you can get a pretty good notion of who's a good lawyer and who isn't. I said, second, compare price. And I tell them, by the way, if you want to know who's a good lawyer, I said, I'll tell you. I said, there are 5 or 6 fellows in the criminal law that I work with consistently where we have co-defendants on cases that I trust, that I think the world of, that I would send my kid to if my kid got in trouble. I will give you their names, and you go see them. And I tell them, we're all going to be about the same in price. And I know that because I try to make myself aware of the market in which I do my trade. I said, so you check out a good lawyer, you find out what the prices are so you can compare price. And then I tell them what I think is the most important thing. It's about the fit. I tell them, you go to see the 5 lawyers I told you about, and you give us all the same case, all 6 of us. We will all wind up in the same place. And we're going to wind up in the same place at the end of the day because we're good lawyers. But we're all going to begin in a different place because that's a function of our personality. We're all going to take a different road to get to the same destination. And I tell them that at the end of the day, coming to the same destination is fine. That's where you want to be. But how you get there is also important. Because there's all those days in between when you're going to worry about, am I going to get there? Where it's going to deprive you of sleep. Where it's going to make you irritable, emotional. You can have the best lawyer in the world, but if you can't communicate with them, you're going to worry more. Sometimes the fit just isn't right. You can have a perfectly good lawyer, and you as the lawyer are going to know this before the client. Because if you let them speak during that interview and you didn't interrupt them, you're going to know whether you can deal with this person. Right? You may have a client with a problem that you can take care of, but it's the kind of client that is going to call your office every morning. And they're going to get upset if they don't talk to you, and your staff is going to get upset because they keep calling and saying, I want to talk to this guy, and you're not taking the call because she is such a pain in the neck. Right? Don't take that client. You're asking for trouble. Everything about you is screaming, don't do it. And as Gregg pointed out to me before we began today, before you get to that point, your staff already knows. They knew 5 minutes after that person walked in the door. And the client knows. They just need you to give them the trigger. You know, to point out to them that you may need a lawyer who doesn't mind talking to you on the phone 3 times a day. So I encourage the comparison because I've lived too long to want to wind up with a client for whom I can do the job, but is just the wrong fit in terms of personality. And let them make the choice because they will. They know. Competence, in terms of the rules, is an important concept. The rules say that a lawyer fresh out of law school can be competent to do anything. And they can be. You know, I had my first case. I did a pretty good job. It probably took me 10 times as long to get there as it would take me today. But I was competent. And the rules say you are. But don't puff your skill. I've had a client for 35 years, a business that I've represented for 35 years. A labor problem came up the other day. It was an aspect that I was totally unfamiliar with. So I told my client, I don't know anything about this. And I said, I can find out for you, or I can send you to someone who knows right away. And he said, no, go ahead, find out for me. Okay, but I've told him now, I can do this, but I'm not going to be quick at it. I'm going to have to do a little work. And it affects what I charge. Don't puff your skills. If you're new at something, tell them, but don't expect to be paid the same amount of money that you get paid for the thing that you're extraordinarily skilled at. Right? The client doesn't want to pay for your learning curve. And so when the client comes to you, you've got a decision to make. Do I want to take this on? Do I want to learn this new thing? Maybe the answer is no. And then you say to yourself, well, am I risking losing the client to somebody else? Right? Maybe, as with my client of 35 years, when I say I can send you to someone else, I'm taking a risk. Maybe they go see that someone else and they say, hey, I really like this guy. Goodbye, Steve. You've got to weigh that and be conscious of it. You can lose that client of 35 years by saying, I'll do this, finding out that I hate this line of inquiry, I don't want to do this research, so it becomes an act of drudgery. You don't do it well, you do it slowly, you charge too much for it, and boom, you lose the client. So be honest about this with the client and talk to the client about, not my area, I'll find out for you, here's what I'm going to charge you for it. And again, you have to do a little research, you have to know the market. What are other people charging for this? Because it's new to you. Here's one of the odd things about the marketplace. I've been doing this for 42 years, and a client comes to me, tells me what the problem is. Maybe they're charged with an offense or are about to be. And it may be that the sun and the moon and the stars are aligned correctly, and I happen to know the assistant DA who has the case, and we've tried many cases together, so that assistant DA knows that Steve will take me to trial on a close case. So I walk over to the courthouse, and in an hour's time, I get the matter settled satisfactorily. If the client had gone to someone who'd been practicing a couple of years, that client would have been charged with a crime publicly, gone through the whole process, maybe gone to trial, maybe achieved the same result after a trial, and that lawyer out a couple of years is going to make more money than I do. Because at the end of the day, complaints about fees will always come back to us and be evaluated in terms of hours put in on a case. Now, is that fair? I don't think so, but that's a whole other question. The fact is that that's how the rules evaluate this. And when I get that kind of client who walks in the door and I know that this is going to happen, I tell them. And I say, look, there are some days that I can walk over to the courthouse and things get settled right away. So I've quoted you a flat fee for this case, but if that happens, I'm going to give you a lot of the money back. But I am going to charge you more than my hourly rate because I happen to think that the value I added to achieve that result is worthwhile. I've done that and I've never had a complaint from anybody. If I had kept the fee, even though it was a flat fee, I would have had a complaint filed against me and I would have lost. So have this discussion. So I'm telling you, if you don't know what something's going to cost, tell the client. If you don't know the marketplace in which you're working, learn it. And on those occasions, when you can deliver something of value in a very short time, be sure to charge for it, but be sure to explain to the client why you've done that. And then recap it all in your fee letter. In most instances, the rules require us to have a written document outlining what we are charging. But that document should cover everything in the first 5 rules. Right? We're going to define what the scope of representation is. We're going to define what the client's expectations are. We're going to talk about if it's going to take a long time, you recap that in your fee letter. It's really easy not to do because most of us have fee letters, right, that are a form on the computer and our secretary fills in the blanks and we never really look at it. Wrong approach. Fill in the blanks and then look at it and add the extra paragraphs that are particular to this client so that you have in writing exactly what you agreed to. If you think this could possibly be a problem client, you address that problem in the fee letter. So I have about 4 minutes to answer any questions that you might have about what I've talked about. Tom, I apologize for coming in too quickly.
That's okay. Hold on until the microphone gets to you so the people on the web can hear you. It's coming right over.
Hello. You said that the 5 major reasons why people are referred to OLR were listed on pages with competence and scope of representation, diligence, etc. How do you fit theft into that? Where does it fit in there? Because isn't theft really one of the major reasons people are referred to OLR?
They're one of the major reasons people are disciplined. It's not one of the major reasons complaints get filed. Right? Many of the complaints that get filed get dismissed before any formal process has occurred. But you don't want to have that complaint filed and have it dismissed. First of all, an insurer is going to look at that, right? And underwriting rules may or may not, depending on the company you're dealing with, take that into account. But the ABA had an article a couple of months ago saying that a survey showed that 35% of people looking for a lawyer go to Yelp. Okay? The person who files a complaint is very often not going to stop there. They're going to go on Yelp, they're going to go on other websites and say, here's what this person did to me. So we want to avoid that. Yes, theft is a big one, but the majority of complaints are about these 5 rules. It's not the majority of discipline issue. Well, I may want to take that back, but
Potentially a lack of respect for the client? I mean, that's really to recognize what their role is and what your role is?
you say, is it a lack of respect for the client? I think it's a problem in communication. I mean, I've known discourteous lawyers who have not been respectful to their clients, but they are not the norm. Not communicating well is, unfortunately, a big problem in the bar.
Steve, we have a question from a web viewer. When discussing fees and knowing your market, you stated that you make yourself aware of the market in which you do your trade. It's always informative to hear how other attorneys analyze their market. How do you conduct your market analysis?
I ask. I ask other lawyers, what are you charging for this? you know, on the low end of the market, I can go online and see their fees online. On the high end of the market, I go around and I ask. Best way I know. I don't, you know, you have to be careful when you do this. You don't collude. But gathering information isn't unlawful and doesn't break the law. So I just ask. Any other questions? Well, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. 10-minute break. We will start up with our panel discussion at 11 o'clock. We're about to get started. All right, welcome back. Hour number 3. We have a panel discussion for you. I'm going to hit some of the topics that were raised and dive into them a little bit deeper, and then we'll hit some new ones too. I will mention at the end of the program, you have an evaluation form in the back of your booklet. We'd appreciate it if you could fill that out, and you can leave it here on the table, or you can hand it to me, or Joe, or Katya, Sally, anybody from WILMIC who's around. For those of you on the web, you will get an email of that evaluation form, and if you can, fill that out for us, and you can email it back. We always appreciate the feedback for future programs. So we have our third speaker with us now on the panel. She is Megan Phillips. Megan is a partner at the Madison law firm of Rellis and Milliken. She specializes in family law, business issues, including personal injury cases. Megan also teaches negotiation and mediation at the UW Law School. Before becoming a lawyer, Megan received a bachelor's degree in journalism with honors from UW-Madison. She is also a contributor to The Verdict and the Wisconsin Law Journal, and was recently featured in Forbes magazine. So, Megan, we welcome you to the program and appreciate you being here today. I just want to, actually, we had a question come in from a web viewer that I'll start with, and then we'll go from there. So, panelists, you can decide how you want to field this one. Here's the question. Often with new and enthusiastic clients, I put in a lot of time in the first months or even weeks. After a court makes an adverse ruling or two, I occasionally get terminated. When the client looks at the time entries, they respond, but you only represented me for a few months. Well, I had researched first plan of attack, a fallback plan of attack, and was enthusiastic and worked hard, but then something doesn't go their way, and my tenacity and hard work looks like front-loading a fee. Any suggestions?
So I think I can comment on this from a family law perspective. I just want to reiterate and underscore what Steve said, that you have to set the client's expectations appropriately in the initial meeting. So if it's a divorce, for example, I will explain to that person that a lot of your fees will be expended up front. I have to file a petition. I might have to ask for a temporary order. I'm going to be trying to do initial negotiations. And then there might be months where there's not a whole lot that happens. So if you tell the client that at the outset, won't be a surprise when they get the bill.
And I have 2 suggestions. The first is, I'm sure everyone already does this, but it's just keep careful records of time. There's nothing more difficult in terms of, I've been on FEAR panels, and you look at someone's record and they don't know what time they spent, they weren't specific, they didn't break it down. So the extent to which you can have detailed records, times, dates, procedures, and what you did is really helpful. And the second thing, to repeat what I said during my presentation, is there's nothing wrong with walking away from some fees. Sometimes things went wrong at the hearings, nothing you did wrong. As I said, sometimes you got the wrong case, you have the wrong court, but sometimes it just went wrong. You just lost for whatever reason. And there's nothing wrong with saying to a client, look, this is what you've paid me so far. I'm going to write off the next whatever of fees. Just be careful of one thing. Remember that you cannot have a client waive malpractice without having them referred to in writing to another attorney for advice. So don't get a written waiver. I wouldn't even suggest it in those terms because you don't want to raise that question, but there's nothing wrong with saying, look, things didn't go well, I'm sorry, here's what I'm going to do to try to help you out a little bit on this.
Yeah, I agree with both. And as Megan said, it's creating the expectation. So if you're in an area of practice where work is front-loaded, you tell the client that, and then they'll understand. It's not having told them that allows them to think that there are other reasons.
Fee disputes are often at the heart of some of the claims that we see at WILMIC. Do you all find that that's a common source of getting sideways with clients?
I really have had luck with avoiding fee disputes because, like Steve, I meet with clients initially for 2.5 hours. I tell them that this is a case that's going to be expensive. I set their expectations. I welcome them to price me out, to go and talk to other attorneys. So when they commit to working with me, they have bought in to the service. They're committed to the service. The other aspect of this is looking at your bill as a communication with the client. If you put 0.5 correspondence, same, same, who wants to pay you for that? Right. You know, use real person language so that they feel like, yeah, I paid for something that was worthwhile.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. You know, bills are, I guess, a form of communication with clients, correct? And sometimes lawyers, I think, get a little sloppy or careless with bills because bills they should convey the value you're providing. Am I right?
Yes, but there's difficulty. So absolutely they should. But first of all, one of the things I ask a client is, what kind of bill do you want? And I asked that at the first meeting. You know, do you want one that just has a number? Do you want the breakdown? How much of a breakdown do you want? And it's interesting. Clients want various things. Some want nothing at all, and some want everything in the world. The difficulty is this. Lawyers' bills are not privileged. That is, that somebody saw a lawyer, for how long, what they were charged by the lawyer, none of this falls within the attorney-client privilege. The description of what you did may fall within the attorney-client privilege. So your bills can be subpoenaed either from the client or from you. And this has happened to me in criminal matters. It's happened to many lawyers in civil matters. And what you have to do is redact the description of what you did, right? Because if it says research statute of limitations, then the other side all of a sudden knows that there might be a problem with the statute of limitation. But the minute you redact, you have to give the other side a redaction log asserting the privilege, and the other side is going to contest that. And so the judge is going to look at the description that's in the bill. The judge may not understand, and frankly, I just don't, I'm pretty careful about the privilege. I don't want anybody looking at a communication that I had with my client. So I tend to be spare. I will say research, but I won't say what it was about. And maybe that's a discussion I ought to have with the client.
And I will, Steve. Maybe because I've never had my billing record subpoenaed or anybody even come close to it. But one of the things, I was about to say one thing I'm not good at, but there's a whole list of them. One of the things I'm not good at is sending CYA letters to my client. I mean, I'm telling clients a lot of times things they don't want to hear. And I think the bad lawyers out there are telling people things they do want to hear. I'm telling them things they should hear. And I'm really, really bad at sending them a follow-up letter saying, Dear Joe, I just explained to you that this is why your future salary increases may be sucked up in support because we couldn't protect it in the future. Just use as an example. And so when he gets the action 2 or 3 years later and I get the call, hey, why didn't you tell me this? I'll put that in my bill. I'm not real good at sending letters. I don't like doing it because it takes me time to draft the letter, and clients aren't going to want to pay for a letter that's to protect me. I don't like doing services that I'm not going to get paid for, and if the client gets the letter, they're going to think, wait a second, Herman's trying to protect himself, not to help me. So I don't like those CYA letters, and I rarely do them. So it's someplace I want to put in writing that the client was advised that there is this future risk. So I will put it in the bill. I will put in there discussion with client regarding risk of future income which could be utilized for motions on support. And I'll put it in there in not huge detail, but enough that I have something in writing on it. And Steve's right, you can never guarantee what Anytime anything's in writing, any place out there on the web or anywhere, you always got the risk someone unfriendly eyes will see it. But I'd prefer to put it in billing than in a CYA letter.
During the first couple hours, I just jotted a few things we learned from Steve and Gregg. Fix your mistakes. Don't go to law school was Gregg. Oh, sorry, Gregg. That was in your outline. Don't cover up mistakes. Read the SCR, Supreme Court rules from time to time. Try not to mistakenly hit reply all that includes OLR. Don't play out of your league. Don't lie, cheat, or steal. The initial client meeting is critical, and we heard from Steve about listening to the client, be clear about fees, which we were just talking about, expectations, and explaining the process. I did want to ask the panel to talk a little bit about Steve, you mentioned how competitive the law practice is now, and you described why, and also I wanted to throw in the additional factor of non-lawyers. The legal Zooms, the internet self-help, the pro se litigants that want to, they don't, I think they don't value attorneys maybe the way clients did in the past. What do you guys think about this? Came up at a program I did up in Portage a few weeks ago. A woman in the audience was very passionate about and quite angry about how she has to compete with non-lawyers who provide similar services. And one of her questions was, what is the State Bar and the legal profession doing about this? So what are your thoughts on, non-lawyer competition, self-help sites and that sort of thing? How do lawyers embrace that new world that we're in and still be competitive and provide value?
Since that's a tough question, Steve, let's let Megan deal with it, okay? Yeah.
All right, Megan, it's on you.
I do have a thought on it. So I think the primary value that I provide to my clients above and beyond what every good lawyer would provide, it's not documents, it's personality, it's a relationship, it's being available to answer the questions that they can't find on the internet. So if a potential client says, hey, I could get, this divorce done for $100 on LegalZoom, you're welcome to do that. You get what you pay for, and you can't call me and ask questions, nor will the customer service for LegalZoom answer your question as well as an attorney can. So I think the key for me is not to think about all the business I'm losing to a LegalZoom, but all the bad clients that LegalZoom is really taking, which they can have.
And they're sparing you that headache?
Yeah.
I'm better at describing the problem than I am coming up with a cure for it. And I see it in two different areas, one of which is that the legal profession in general has done a really, really, really lousy job of building a fence around our profession and protecting it. Other professions have done a great job of this. To get a CPA and being able to appear in tax court, there's certain rules and regulations. I think we don't have enough respect for ourselves. We've sort of decided as a profession, hey, anybody could do this. What we do isn't special, it's not important, and we haven't built this fence, and we have paralegals giving legal advice, psychologists in my field giving legal advice, and nobody seems to really care about it. And part of the problem is that we don't respect ourselves in terms of what we do with law school education, and the practice of law adds a service you can't do without it. And therefore, if we don't respect ourselves, nobody will respect us. And the second, and I'm going to go off on a limb here, I write a column. I used to write for Wisconsin Law Journal. I now write for the State Bar, Fast Track. And the one column I've gotten the most response to was criticizing bar associations who run free clinics. And I'm speaking to somebody, I've volunteered for the free clinic in Milwaukee for, 25 years now. And my associates are required to volunteer for it. But it's means tested. In other words, before you can come in, you have to state what your income is, what your assets are, and if it's above a certain level, go hire a lawyer. There are a lot of counties that don't do that. We give away free legal advice. We say, hey, it's really not worth anything. That's the message. We don't care if you're wealthy. We will give you free advice and free information. And so I don't have a real cure for it, except that if, as I said, if we don't respect ourselves, why should anyone respect us? And why shouldn't they just go to the internet thinking they can get as good information as they can get from us in person?
How many in the room have gone to a medical information site? WebMD, Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, so almost everybody's hands. That a good thing? Yeah. So what makes us so special that we shouldn't allow people to go on the internet and find out about the law? I mean, you do it for medicine, why can't other people do it for law? The future of our profession is not in keeping secret things which are easily understandable from the public. The future of our profession is in providing services above that which they can get on the net. And we have to understand that. In 1972, when I graduated law school, everybody who bought a home had a lawyer at the closing. Today, nobody does. You don't need the lawyer at the closing. And it may be that with LegalZoom, for many people, they don't need a lawyer to do their will. We have to find work at a higher level. And that's the answer. We're not going to stop information going out on the web. We don't fight the First Amendment. We have to find our place in a new technology.
I think we had a couple of questions. I'll catch you over on the microphone.
or sleep.
Yeah, there we go. And then over here, and then Claude.
Yeah, actually, with respect to the question was directed at those who are non-lawyers, but it actually, in the New York Times just this past week, they published an article concerning the number of graduates from ABA-accredited law schools that exceed the likely number or the estimate of the number of needed attorneys. And what I experience on a regular basis is new attorneys who don't have experience, who are out sort of on their own, cutting fees on cases in a way that they clearly cannot provide good representation to, in this case, mostly criminal defendants. And I think that goes to the point that, I apologize, the middle speaker was giving, that we have done a poor job as a profession at creating a fence. And one of the fences that professions create is that in licensing, you limit the number of licenses. So that, for instance, there's not 1 million plumbers, there's only a fixed number of plumbers, and it's typically the number of plumbers that you need.
Which I can comment, the UW Law School at least is on top of. So Steve and I both teach at the UW, and they have drastically reduced the number of incoming law students that they are taking because graduating law students can't find work. So I think the response has maybe not been as fast as we would have liked, but there is something to be done about it. The other comment is, I think it's a function of the market. If you look at how markets work, there's always going to be a clearance rack, right? And maybe the clothes are crappy. I mean, if someone wants to pay me a $600 retainer because that's what the gal down the block will do, I don't want that client. It's just not someone
It's, right now we have a glut of lawyers because of the crash in '08. Law school enrollment nationally is down 28%. Now, I'll tell you the bad part about that. It's down 28% because nobody wants to graduate with $105,000 in debt and not be able to get a job. And the word finally got out, however slowly, to guidance counselors, and they're directing people away from law school. But what it means is the smartest people aren't going to law school. They're going elsewhere. So we have a lower enrollment. We have a lower pool from which to draw. But the marketplace will take care of this in time. We just happen to be in it at the wrong time when everybody's undercutting us. But hey, that's life.
I guess I was really more speaking about what the profession as a whole could do, because you're not in complete control in a public institution like the University of Wisconsin. You do have the responsiveness component to the needs of the state. But that article outlined specifically, the one I referenced from the New York Times, referenced private institutions that are, in that case, they were actually owned by some hedge fund that are producing attorneys. And they are producing ABA accredited, they're law schools that are ABA accredited, producing attorneys that are licensable, but which, in that specific case, they weren't getting licensed. So you have a number of people who are going out and seeking law school accreditation. You have a number of people who are seeking to become attorneys, and they exceed the number that's currently needed. What's the profession supposed to do about getting the message that all of you are talking about what the value actually well-trained, skilled, and experienced attorney adds, and how do you support that information back to a client?
Well, to start with, the profession needs to police and the unauthorized practice of law out there. Steve's right. The First Amendment says if you want to put forms out there, that's perfectly fine. There is a line between providing forms and providing legal advice. Does anybody in this room, I'd love to ask anybody online there, raise your hand in your own office. Does anybody in this room know of a single case where anyone, anywhere, has ever been prosecuted civilly, administratively, criminally for practicing law without a license? I don't see a single hand up. I never have heard of it happening, and yet I know of a lot of cases where that line has been crossed dramatically between providing just forms and providing like WebMD does. You go to WebMD, and they'll give you a description of a disease and what symptoms and some treatments. They're not going to diagnose your illness and tell you what treatment you should take for it. You want to do that, you have to go to a doctor. And we have not drawn that line clearly, and we have not enforced it.
Go ahead, Claude.
I have a question. You have a flat fee. Do you keep track of your time? Number one. Number two, you have a contingent fee. Do you keep track of your time? And why should there be a difference if there is a difference?
You do contingency?
I do contingency cases. I keep track of all of my time. Every 6-minute increment I keep track of. It helps me in a number of ways. Number one, if I'm sharing the case with another attorney, it's helpful to know who's billed what. I think the client is also entitled to know what work is being performed on the case. So let's say that the case settles, I'm entitled to 20 grand. The client says, I don't think that's really fair based on what you did. It's helpful to be able to produce pages and pages and pages of time that I billed. It is a lot of work, though, and I can see why some lawyers might tend to not want to do that.
Steve said in his presentation that if you ever have to defend your fees, it comes down to hours, and the case law on it says exactly that. It says that if courts are going to determine fees, they're going to look at what's called the lodestar method. What the lodestar method is, it's arithmetic, hours times time. So we're not allowed to do contingency fees in divorce. I rarely do.
Criminal.
Or criminal.
Right.
I rarely do flat fees, but in the cases where I might in a post-judgment action, the only time I don't keep track of my time is if it's a client I've represented before. I have confidence that they're going to pay me no matter what. They're not going to complain, and if they don't want to, I'll just walk away from it.
You know, of all the licensed professions in Wisconsin, and there are scores of them, lawyers are the only ones who are told what they can charge in a capitalist society. I find this astounding. And maybe it's because we are governed by the Supreme Court rather than by Department of Reg and Licensing, or DSP as it is now, right? and there's something just fundamentally wrong about this. But nonetheless, it exists, and I believe the wrong is compounded by the fact that it always comes down to hours. As I told you, in my line of business, you get the young lawyer who takes somebody all the way through a trial, and all of the public and all the public humiliation and emotional expense, And they make more money than the experienced lawyer who gets the matter done overnight. There's just something wrong about that.
Nick, if you don't mind waiting a second, would you guys mind if I rant about this for a second? Sure. Okay. There's a story about a guy who owns a factory and the machinery shuts down, nothing works. And nobody can fix it, but there's one guy, he's the top expert. Calls the expert, said, would you come over, I'll pay you whatever. Guy comes over, takes a look, walks up to one place, reaches in his back pocket, takes out a screwdriver, tightens the screw, and everything starts working. It's purring like a kitten. Owner falls over himself. Thank you so much, sir. Send me a bill, whatever. Next day he gets a bill, $10,000. Calls the guy and he says, do me a favor, please. Could you send me an itemized version of your bill? The next day he gets itemized bill. Turning one screw, $1. Knowing which screw to turn, $9,999. We get paid for turning screws, okay? And that's the problem with hourly rates. I shy away from them. I try to find ways of not doing things strictly by the hour. The price for that is I can't enforce my fees in court. But I think the fun of practicing law, even divorce law, which is probably even harder to find fun in than criminal law, is trying to figure out which screw to turn. That's the challenge. That's where this becomes interesting. Just turning screws, anyone could do that. It's no fun.
Nikki.
On the unauthorized practice of law, I've had an actually different response. I do some disability law, where there are not many experts, one that are even affordable or even around that do a lot of the school law. And the websites happen to be sometimes the only information out there on how to represent. And as much as I'd like to protect the profession, how do we not prevent those individuals who have no other option and without a civil Gideon wouldn't be able to do that?
The answer is, look at me, when no one's preventing them. It's not a question of preventing them from going on the web or the web presenting the information. It's finding this line. And it's not an easy question. That's why I say I'm better at describing the issue than I am at finding a cure for it. But there's a line somewhere between providing the information, putting it online, letting people get to it, and going the next step, which is, I can't imagine a doctor other than someone just with generic symptoms, but anybody with a serious illness, defining it, diagnosing it, and prescribing a cure, and saying, well, you know what, I've never met you, I've never examined you, but come in next Monday at 9 o'clock and I'll cut you open and do full surgery on you. I don't think it's going to happen. Doctors that I know want to look, they want to feel, they want to get a testing done before they decide whether or not surgery. When I handle a divorce case, certainly when Steve handles a criminal case and Megan handles divorce and civil cases as well, we're doing surgery. We're cutting people open. We're cutting cases open. I want to see ahead of time what's going on there, not just generic information.
Before another question from the audience, a web viewer question. Is it appropriate to bill for the time it takes to write a fee agreement, engagement letter, and/or client bill?
That's a good question.
The capitalist in me says yes, the OLR says no.
Okay. Another question. I think there is a responsibility to provide affordable legal services. In this economy, with the reduction of the middle class, how can regular folks pay an attorney?
I think that's a huge challenge today. And it's part of the reason I think why LegalZoom and questions answered on AVO and the glut of blogs and websites with legal information do maybe have a place, because the truth is there are clients who cannot afford us. And I work at legal clinics. I worked for Marcia Mansfield at the law school the whole time I was in law school, do the FLAC program here in Dane County, and we just don't have enough attorneys who are volunteering, or we can't serve all the need. So I think that that's a huge challenge, is how do we as a profession become more committed to pro bono services, and what do we do with the folks who can maybe pay $100 an hour but can't pay $300?
I disagree. and here, let me disagree to the extent I disagree in criminal cases. I've watched over the last 20 years people run for sheriff, district attorney, judge, saying they would get tough on crime. And for 20 years, they've been delivering on their promise to the electorate. And when these people get elected, they look at this and they say, gee, there's just one thing missing. And they come to me and they say, Steve, would you please represent this person at a loss so that I can put a bow on this gift that I'm giving to the public? And I say, screw you. You know, when you're willing to judge the case and pay your staff their salary and their health care and all their benefits out of your pocket, and the sheriff does the same and the district attorney does the same, then I'll consider your request. But a defense is constitutionally required. It is the obligation of the taxpayers in the same way that they have to pay for streets and sanitation. And judges and the bar come to us and say, do this for free, it's noble. And they don't ask anyone else to do it. And it's wrong. This is something that the public should pay for. And I'm not going to fill that gap by paying an extra tax. If they want their war on crime, they can have it, but they're not going to get my help and they shouldn't get yours.
The economics of it work that you can have a practice on the two extremes where you handle really, really good cases, provide really, really good services. Or on the other extreme, if you want to take a lot of $100 cases, you're going to have a ton of them in order to make up the economics. And then what makes the economics more difficult in today's world is, I think it was Megan that talked about the student loans that kids have today in graduating law school. When Steve and I graduated, it's not that it didn't exist, but nope, he had a loan, it was a couple $1,000s, if that.
Tuition was $400 a semester.
And my undergrad tuition at UW was $250 my first semester. Today, I believe it's $4,500 in comparison. So we have this huge economic thing, which is, when I graduated law school, if you had a loan, I didn't have any, because it was tuition was $400. But if you did, one of my roommates said I think it was $2,000, big deal. Today, you've got to, apparently they want those loans paid back. I don't know. Go figure, right? And if you're going to take $100 cases, you better take a whole bunch of them, which leads to going back to what Steve said in terms of avoiding OLR complaints. A lot of these complaints arise because if you take hundreds of these cases to make up the economics from not having a smaller number of big cases, you're still going to get the same, 3 phone calls a week in the first billing cycle? And you still only have 24 hours in your day, and some of those calls aren't going to be returned. And that's where lawyers get into trouble.
All right. Chuck.
Randy.
Sorry.
I was going to comment about using WebMD and non-lawyer sources for legal information, in that it's just, as far as I'm concerned, a place to start, and then you've got to consult someone who you might find through the web. My personal experience is I had a mine-run automobile accident case with a fellow who was a guest of the county and soon to be a guest of the state, who wanted a 1983 action over a federal case over a 2-week treatment for a car accident. But the reason I took the microphone was to support Attorney Herman's factory story. That's a true story. It involves Steinmetz, who was one of the first electrical engineers with Edison. And it wasn't a screw, it was a mark on a generator. And he said, hit this mark with a hammer. And when Edison objected to the bill, that's what the bill was. $1 to make the mark, $9,000 to know where to make it.
Any other questions? Oh, okay.
It's more of a comment, so regarding law schools managing the population of lawyers, et cetera. After some 40 years, my law school's going out of business. And it may have to do with the reputation of its graduates, I'm not sure of that. But since there's a lot of internet conversation between my friends and I think they brought it on themselves. The reason is, and I graduated from there 30-some years ago, at that time, you were going to be a lawyer, a traditional lawyer, a trial lawyer, which is what I ended up doing, and I have no regrets. But if it wasn't that, you somehow were going to get shuffled off to the government or the insurance industry, unless you joined the Army, which was, something I wasn't about to do. Over the years, I found that there are a number of fairly well-paying, engaging professions that benefit from having lawyers involved, and lawyers benefit from being involved. And I think that's something that at least my school just, I don't know, at least ignored for the first 10, 12 years they were going on. So when you talk about limiting the profession, I think the education has to adapt.
Okay. Anybody else? Thank you, sir. Okay, I'm going to turn to Megan. Megan, you have in the materials your kind of your top 10 list, and I know a lot of them overlap with points that Gregg and Steve have made this morning, but I want to give you a chance to kind of hit the ones that you find to be most important.
Well, I think an interesting topic for discussion, hoping this might spur a comment or two, is the conundrum of you have, let's say, a significant fee that a client is not paying. In family law, we have a unique remedy in which we can ask for a judgment in a case. There's a special statute that allows us to do that, but most attorneys are left with the crossroads of, do I sue my client or not? And I think that attorneys really greatly differ on the answer to this question. In the materials, I say, at a minimum, think carefully about it. Is the fee that you stand to recover worth the hassle and the headache and the potential OLR risk and the potential malpractice risk? I won't say I've never sued a client, because I have, but I do it seldom, and I think about it carefully. And I think it's really interesting to hear thoughts from others on this topic.
The last time we sued a client for fees in our office had to be 20 years ago. And it was a client who got terrific results. He was a doctor, he had plenty of money to pay for it, and he countersued for malpractice. The end result was as follows. His case was going to be dismissed because he couldn't find an expert. And couldn't find an expert because I'm not just bragging, it wasn't my case, it was my then boss, later partner's case. There really was no malpractice. And we resolved the case as follows. He paid the fees in full. He wrote a letter to our malpractice carrier saying that he made a mistake by bringing the counterclaim. There really was no malpractice. And the part of the negotiations that I told his lawyer was totally not, I handled it for our firm, that was totally non-negotiable, was a personal letter of apology to my boss, Mr. Loeb, apologizing for putting him through that. And he did all three. Paid the fees in full. He wrote a letter to our malpractice carrier saying that there really was no malpractice. He made a mistake. And it wasn't the best letter of apology, but he did write the letter and say he was sorry, and we decided we'll never do it again. That's as good results as you're ever going to get, okay? Dismissal, letter of apology letter, and we decided under no circumstances. First of all, talk about, can you bill for drafting a fee agreement? Trust me, you can't bill for representing yourself in a fee dispute or malpractice case. So it's a lot of time, and it's embarrassing. I'm in front of a judge. Good fortune, it was a judge I know very, very well. Always been good friends with him. I don't play off friendship with judges. First of all, it never does me any good. And second, I don't think it really helps. But I don't want a judge thinking he or she's doing me any favors either. If I want some consideration by a court, it's going to be on a scheduling issue, something like that. And I don't want to think a judge thinking he or she's cutting me a break on it. And we decided for all those reasons, we'd just walk away from fees before we ever did it again. And we have never done it since.
Steve, you mentioned you're very open and honest about your fees. You don't shy away from that. When I talk to young lawyer groups, lawyers just out of school and so forth, and often the question I get is, it's hard for us to turn away business because we're trying to, you talked about the hungry lawyer. How do you reconcile that? How do young what would you respond to the young lawyers who, they agree with what you're saying, just doing a case for $100 doesn't make much sense. But on the other hand, they don't want to see business walk out the door. An established lawyer, such as all of you, are in a better position to do that. Some of them maybe not.
I was a very hungry young lawyer once, and so went through this and didn't let business walk out the door, and every time I did that, it was a mistake. Those are the cases on which you lose money. And we're selling something to make a profit, just like anybody else, and you have to ask yourself, will I make a profit on this? And if the answer is no, you let it go out the door. It's that simple. You take it because you're afraid of losing business, and then a year later you look back and you say, I lost my shirt on this.
Or you're calling WILMIC.
Or you're calling WILMIC. Either one you don't want to have happen.
One of the best pieces of advice I ever got, and it comes from the author, and I forget his name, Tom, who wrote it's the best-selling book ever by the ABA, and if you're a young lawyer out there in private practice, it's called How to Get and Keep Good Clients. And it's the best book either. It's like 80, 100 pages just filled with practical information, and one of the tips in there is if you ever have a choice between doing the work and not getting paid, or not doing the work and not getting paid, always choose to not do the work and not get paid.
Megan, other of your top 10 lists that you want to hit on today?
I think, too, for lawyers maybe who have been in practice 10 years or less, let's say, really the importance of two things. First, not hesitating to call the ethics helpline. I think that ethics pickles come up for everyone, regardless of how long you've been practicing law, but particularly for people who are in solo practice or who have small firms. Maybe you're the only person in your firm who practices criminal law or family law. We pay dues to the Wisconsin State Bar and have this wonderful resource, so why not use it? I've gotten really great guidance on situations where I just didn't feel quite like I knew the right answer. Tim Pierce, if he's not in, he calls you back really fast. He has a sidekick now named Aviva Kaiser, who's awesome. I also think that there's value in listservs. I am very careful before I send a message on the listserv, but if you have a case where you've asked a couple people and you really think it's a good question, you can learn a lot from listservs, and you can avoid a lot of pitfalls by running a question past other attorneys. So those are two things not to overlook. They're very helpful.
And I don't want to speak for Steve, but I think he'll join me in this. Do you ever mind getting a call from some young lawyer?
It's just where I was going to go. Find a mentor. I was a young lawyer out on my own, trying to learn how to do trial work, trying to figure out what's the business end of the law practice. And I would make a point of meeting older, experienced lawyers and calling them. And they were terrific, and I've never forgotten that. I don't want to invite everybody listening to this to call me, but, call Gregg. But we really don't mind. It's how we got somewhere. We don't mind helping someone else get there, too.
I made a slight policy change a number of years ago. I never turn down a call. Someone calls, I'm an attorney, I need some advice or information. The slight policy change is if it's more than just 2 or 3 minutes, I now have the following, quote, charge, so people don't think they're getting things for free. What I will say at the end of the conversation is, to whatever extent you think that the information or advice I gave you has value, make a contribution to the charity of your choice in my name as a thank you for the advice and information. If you don't have a favorite charity, make it to mine. They always ask what it is. My joke always is the Herman Children's College Fund. Then I named some real charity. But if you're afraid of taking too much time for the attorney, you can offer to pay. Most of it, I've never accepted payment for a 10 or 15-minute call. It's 10 or 15 minutes, big deal. And at the very most, I have one friend who calls me about once a year with some problem he thinks is too intricate, and the conversation starts with, Greg, I just made a contribution to my church. He's very much into it. He said, in your honor, now can I ask you a question?
Katya.
We have one comment from the web, and we have two questions. So the comment is, there was an attorney who graduated law school but wasn't admitted to practice.
Katya. Mike.
Oh, sorry. Everybody else is supposed to use this. Okay, a comment. An attorney who graduated from law school but was not admitted to practice, practiced for about 10 years. After he was discovered, he was charged with the unauthorized practice of law, received a slap on the wrist and a lecture from the judge to get admitted to the bar. He was using another lawyer's ID number on pleadings back in the mid-90s. So, all right, here's a question. In the last 5 years, I've encountered several members of the bench who obviously have dementia-related issues that impact litigants and their lawyers. Lawyers who practice in those courtrooms daily are either insensate or used to what locals call a cranky or irrational or even sadistic judge. As an outsider, I've tried to reach out to someone of stature in those communities in an empathic way. Judge so-and-so looks tired. Is he or she okay? And just like clockwork, it is seen as gossip, not a thoughtful way of not hurting or embarrassing a well-respected member of the court. What are good and non-gossiping lawyers supposed to do?
Let's give that to Megan.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Aren't you glad you came here
Yeah.
today, Megan?
Awesome.
The answer is there's power in numbers. So if you have a judge that is having problems and issues, don't go out. Other people have noticed it, and if they haven't, then you're wrong. So it's getting a group of people that together to help support.
Okay.
I have a comment additionally to that. It's probably because I'm getting older and concerned about it that I think that this doesn't apply just to judges. It certainly applies to lawyers too. I'm wondering if, like young lawyers, we could have some mentoring program for senior lawyers that would help them stay competent in their practice, be able to be flexible in their practice, and be allowed to continue to practice as long as they'd like to.
She's talking about us, Steve.
I know.
We hear references to the gray tsunami,
Yeah.
the number of lawyers that are heading into retirement, and I think your suggestion is actually really good. All right, we have another question here from the web. Megan mentioned AVO in relation to websites that offer legal information. I agree that you get what you pay for and they can have all those clients they want. But I recently received another of those AVO emails encouraging me to contact them and give them information on myself and my practice. And even though they admit that no one has ever written to them to rate my performance, and to my knowledge in 26 years of practice, I've never had a complaint filed against me. They've given me a 6.5 rating, not even a passing grade in most schools. And I'm wondering what to do about that. If I tell them I will not give them any information, they'll keep the rating where it is and then post a page that states that I have refused to give them information. I think this is just blackmail to force me to pay them money to improve my rating, and I'm really mad. What would you all do?
So I know a lot about AVO because as a younger attorney, this is a way that a lot of folks get clients, and they're not all bad clients. I can tell you that you can get a 10 out of 10 superb rating without paying AVO anything. All you need to do is have clients review you and say that you're a good attorney. And it's free to list speaking engagements and published work that you've done and where you've gone to law school and those types of things, and your rating goes up. What you do pay for is advertising. If you want, when someone types in criminal law, to have your face come up first, you're going to have to pay for that on AVO. I think AVO has a lot of benefits and a lot of drawbacks, for sure. There are blog type responses. that I think kind of might border on legal advice versus information. They also have a new service where you can sign up to receive calls directly to your cell phone from potential clients and give them a 10-minute consult in exchange for a fee. So you have to give them your bank account information, and they only deposit the money if the potential client said that your information was helpful. So there's a lot of kind of borderline stuff, and you have to be aware of internet marketing.
Okay. We just have a few minutes left. Megan, I wanted you to touch on number 10. I think it's an important point to make here before we wrap up. Life balance.
So I spent a long time not taking care of myself. And it actually turned out that I had a brain tumor for much of law school and the first several years that I practiced. And I blame that on being hungry, on being so hell-bent on building a practice and being a partner and kicking ass. And I've really realized now that if I don't take care of myself, I can't take care of my clients either, and I can't make money, and I can't do the things that define success for a lot of people. So I'm happy to say that now I really pay attention to work-life balance. I'm pregnant with my first child, which I never thought I would do, because what kind of a high-powered litigator has a baby? But I think that my personal life can be fulfilling when practicing divorce law and doing litigation isn't always fulfilling. You know, you have to have a fallback plan.
Yeah.
Can I add to that, I represent a fair number of clients in divorce who are lawyers, and I have never had one yet come to see me and say they're going through a divorce because they spent too much time at home with their family and with their spouse, and going home to too many dinners and spending too many weekends away from the practice of law. That's not why they're seeing me.
It's tough. Clients with cell phones, email, texting, clients expect 24/7 access. And again, this is something you address at the first meeting. I ask clients, what is the best way to communicate with you? And some will tell me telephone, some email, some text messages. And we establish parameters. And I tell them, if you have a question, call me. And if I'm not there, I promise that someone will get back to you within 24 hours. And I keep that promise. And that if it's something that requires immediate attention, to make sure somebody in my office is told that right away, either by email or telephone, and then we take care of it. But if you don't establish that parameter, you're going to get phone calls and emails 24/7 in today's world.
It used to be a lot more fun for me when my kids were younger. I used to tell everyone, go ahead and call me at any time, day or night. My phone number's in the book. I have 3 teenagers. One of them's going to answer the phone and say, oh yeah, Dad will get back to you. And 2 weeks later, one of my kids will come up having written it on their hands, and if it's one of my boys, they haven't washed their hands in the last 2 weeks, it'll still be there, and say, you're supposed to call. Oh, it's really important. When did they call? Yesterday. It would have been 2 weeks ago. So I always give the speech, and I said, if that's the message you want, go ahead and call me. 2 weeks from now, I'll find out what hasn't been washed off his hands. They always laugh, and I'll say, but if you do call me between 8 and 5, Monday through Friday, I guarantee you'll get a call back that day.
Gotcha. Web question?
Yep, this is a comment from a lawyer. Says, I ask clients during the first meeting if they wish to be kept well informed. I'll say yes. Then ask how they wish to be kept informed, suggesting to them that informal email has a lower client cost. And most say yes again. I then mention that many clients complain about their lawyers, saying they don't know what is going on, or their lawyer is too busy to talk to them, in complimenting them on recognizing the value of communication. This sets the stage for a client who has no objections to charges for communication. If not done, many lawyers feel that the time spent informing clients of status is of very low value, in effect not billable, but it is.
Good advice.
Yeah. All right. Final question from me, anyway. Panelists. Do any of you fear the future of the practice of law? What's the law practice going to look like in 10 years, 15 years?
I'm totally jazzed for it
Are
myself.
you? Why, Megan?
Because I'm good at marketing, and advertising, marketing, PR, journalism, that's all my thing. And I think that what I try to really impress upon law students is that you have to learn business if you want to succeed in this, because I think inevitably what we're not teaching students in law school is a huge part of what you do is business. So if that's your forte, I think that, the sky's the limit. And if not, learn about it.
Okay.
Take some courses.
Greg?
I hope Megan's right. I'm more scared about it because I see where we're going in terms of technology going so fast, so rapidly, and so unpredictably that I'm going to follow Yogi Berra's advice and not make any prediction in terms of where we're at, because I never dreamt would be where we are today in terms of ability. A lot of it's wonderful. I love email. I love the research and things you can do on the internet, and all that's great. But if you had told me when I was in law school what we would be able to do, I don't know if I would have believed you. So I can't tell you where we will be down the line. I just hope Megan's right.
Well, here's my prediction. We're going to see very highly skilled paralegals take over some of the lower functions that we perform. We're going to see them employed by large corporations to write their contracts, to take care of HR problems, employment law. We're going to see them in healthcare law. And lawyers are going to have to perform the higher functions of the profession. We're going to have to become more specialized. We'll see the paralegals and the internet take care of the, home closings.
All right. Thank you all very much. Please give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you all for coming on the web. Thank you for watching. Steve, Greg, and Megan, thank you. Please fill out the evaluation forms if you have a moment, and we will see you at our next seminar.
We're naming him Henry.
Wow.